All right, I'll lead off and pass it to Jerry. That Jerry Weesey. But Montague is bound as well as I, in penalty alike, and 'tis not hard, I think, for men so old as we to keep the peace.
Honorable reckoning are you both, and pity should you live at odds so long. But now, my lord, what say you to my suit?
I say more what I have said before. If my child is yet a stranger in the world, he hath not seen the change of 14 years. But a few more summers wither in her pride, where we may think her right to be a bride.
Younger than she are happy mother's maid.
And too soon marred are those so early made. Earth hath swallowed all my hopes, but she is the hopeful lady of my earth. But woo her, gentle Paris, give her heart. My will to her consent is but a part, and she agrees, within her scope of choice, lies my consent and fair according voice. This night I hold an old accustomed feast, whereto I have invited many a guest, such as I love, and you among the store. One more, most welcome, makes my number more. At my poorhouse look to behold this night, earth-treading stars that make dark heaven bright. Such comfort as do lusty young men feel, when well-apparelled April on the heel of limping winter treads, even such delight among fresh fennel buds shall you see this night. Inherit at my house, hear all see, and like her most, whose merit most shall be, which, on more view of many minds in one, may stand in number, though in reckoning none. Come, go with me. Go, said I, trudge about, through fair Verona, find those persons out, whose names are written there, and to them say, my house and welcome on their pleasure stay. Find them out whose names are written here. It is written that the teenager is meddled with his yard, and the tailor with his glass, the bishop fisher with his pencil, and the painter with his net. But I am sent to find those persons whose names are here written, and can never find what names the writing person has here written. I must to the learned. In good time. Man, one fire burns out another's burn. One pain is lessened by another's anger. Turn giddy and giddy. Hope by backward turning. One desperate great fear is another's anguish. Takes out some new infection in my eye, and a rank poison below his eye.
Your plank and leaf is excellent for that.
What I agree.
No, you're up. Go ahead. We'll follow an unusual order. It's all right.
Why don't you? Art thou mad? Not mad, but all more than the madness. Shut up in prison, kept without my food, whipped and tormented, and God good fellow alone.
God good evening. I pray, sir, can you read?
I, mine own fortune, in my misery.
Perhaps you have learned it without a book. But I pray, can you read anything you see?
If I know the letters and the language.
Yea, say honestly, rest you merry. Say, fellow, I can read. Signor Martino and his wife and daughter, County Anselm and his beauty of 50, the lady widow of the studio, Signor Consencio and his lovely nieces, Mercutio and his brother Valentine, mine uncle Elect, his wife and daughter, and fair niece Rosalie, Lucia, Signor Valentino, and his cousin Carlo, Lucille and Diogenes Elena, fair assembly, leadership I found.
Yep, Larry. Doesn't it say to supper?
No, it said letter.
Well, ours says to supper. You must have a different book than we do.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Supper to our house. tell you without asking. An answer is great rich Capulet, and if you be not of the house of Montague, I pray come in precious cup of wine, rescue me.
At this same ancient feast of Capulet sups fair Rosaline, whom thou so loves, with all the admired beauties of Verona. Go thither, and with unattained eye compare her face with some that I shall show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow.
When the devout religion of mine eyes maintain such falsehood, then turn tears to fire, and these who often drown will never die, transparent heretics, be burnt for liars, one fairer than my love, the all-seeing sun never saw her match such as since first the world begun.
Touch, you saw her fair, and else came by, herself poised, with herself in either eye, your lady's love against some other maid, that I will show you shining at this feast. She shall stand so well that now seems best.
I go alone, no such sight to be shown, but to rejoice in splendor of my love.
Well, we're carried a little further along with some of the characters. Old Capulet proves himself to be pretty wise. He seems, after years of experience, to have let it sink in, and he sees it would be pretty easy for him now at his age to drop the feud for the folly that it is. He's also very balanced, and he's very wise concerning his daughter. On one hand, he'd like to see her have more experience, because he sees that strong actions, especially the kind of actions like maternity, do something to set the personality that it no longer continues to grow. He would like to see her grow and expand more, and he wouldn't want her marrying too soon, which I think is pretty wise. And the second thing he realizes, though, in his balance, is that she must have her freedom of choice. It's quite advanced for that day and age when people's main choices were made for them by their parents. Now her age at this point is significant. As students of the mysteries, we know that what the physiologists and the medical community call climateracies, or 7-year periods, are important. Every 7 years there is a major physiological change in the body. 2 of those changes are much greater than others, and they are called the greater and lesser climaterics, being puberty and menopause. Astrologically, the moon comes to one of the quadrate positions to its natal position every 7 years. And since the moon, from the times of the fetus on, rules building or constructing processes, every time the moon comes in a square position, a new phase of building is accomplished. Also, every 7 years, Uranus has moved another 30 degrees. And the 30 degrees is what the Babylonians called the sesquimagisal basis of all astrological aspects, such as the sextile or the trine or the opposition. They're all aliquot by 30. The puberty is one of the most important climateracies. At age 7, when the teeth change and the vital body is born, that begins a recapitulation of a plant-like existence very far back in a different period of our evolution, when the Earth wasn't even around, when we were in a nebula that was formed in a different way. So we grow rapidly in the ages between 7 and 14. At 14, the desire body is born or it is awakened. And since the principle of desire drives the physical and etheric bodies to do things, to go places, to accomplish things, and to reproduce, it's sort of the enemy of the vital body, which would vegetate all the time. And so when the desire body kicks in, it curbs the influence of the etheric vital body, and growth is no longer rampant. After 3.5 years, that is about 17.5, the mind begins to dawn, and independent thinking begins to dawn. And at 21, the mind is completely born, and then it can start curbing the desires. So what Capulet is thinking, though he probably doesn't know anything about mysticism like this, is that it would be better if she not act on her desires and wait until more maturity comes in and can make her decision on a more rational basis. But above all, he doesn't want to arrest her development. If we look along line 46, it's an interesting proposition there. It's one that we've come up against before but haven't commented on. It appears that Shakespeare knew the principle of backfires, same principle that forest fire fighters use to this day. They start a fire to burn an area out so that the main fire doesn't have anything to burn on, and so they can control the smaller fire. And so what is suggested here by Benvolio is that if he can start another fire going for Romeo, he will be distracted from the others. Now Shakespeare knew this principle, but he also knew when it didn't apply. He knows when it is wise and when it isn't, because some people misapplied that principle in Elizabethan England when the plague was rampant. And they had the belief that if you got syphilis, you wouldn't get the plague. So, and so a lot of people got both syphilis and the plague. And Shakespeare joked about that and said, no, that is not a backfire. That's something altogether different. Yes. Yes, they got it as a prevention. That's a good enough excuse as any, if that's... Yeah.
So there's a lot of babies that are being, caused.
Yeah. Romeo sidesteps the whole business, and there's one that even the commentators of our book don't note, because this is a pretty good book as far as the notes are concerned. And Romeo throws a pun in there. Now this play, Romeo and Juliet, is another one of the major herbal plays. In A Winter's Tale, or The Winter's Tale, we saw an extensive use of flower language. It was flowery as well, because if we remember Leontes and Perdita, not Leontes, but who was the king of Bohemia? He starts a conversation with Perdita, and they talk back and forth in the language of flowers. And they bring in some interesting ideas in a very abstract way. When we read Hamlet, we saw that that was another herbal play, the most notable instance being Ophelia, when she has gone insane, rattling off herbs as she throws them over her shoulder while she's floating down the stream to her drowning death. The classic line, that's rosemary, That's for remembrance. Romeo and Juliet is another play that uses a lot of herbalism, but it's much more therapeutic or medicinal herbalism. Now, what Shakespeare is talking of here is the common plantain. There are actually about 7 or 8 plantains that are used herbally. And that's what he's talking about here. Plantain is a vulnerary. And being a vulnerary, that means it has the property of closing up wounds. In our latitudes, it is one of the better vulneraries, probably not as good as, what's the plant I'm trying to think of? Well, can't think of it right now. Terrible memory. What? Comfrey, yes. Yes, Greek or Russian comfrey are very excellent vulneraries. So this is what Romeo is alluding to when he says, put the plantain on your shin, meaning to say it would close up the wound if you had scratched yourself on the shin. But what he's also doing is he's punning with shin on sin. Because in Shakespeare's time, and ever since, plantain was considered a Venusian herb. And as a Venusian herb, it was used either in antipathy to Mars or in sympathy to Venusian illnesses. As a antipathy to Mars, it was used for clearing up the head and for clearing up the private parts, especially in males. And Venus quenches Mars' fire, and so what Romeo is talking about in the pun here is that it would cure the Martian condition, the tendency to sin, by calming the passions. In our time, it still is used as a Venus sympathetic. It's used for urinary conditions. Sometimes it's even used to halt bedwetting. In the latter part of the scene, we come up against something that the whole series is about. We're studying various aspects of polarity, especially the polarity that is cause and consequence, the two poles of events as they occur in time and space. Thus far, as we see Romeo, he's sort of going by the Bible verse, if thine eye be perfect or single, your whole body shall be enlightened. He's going by the principle of he keeps one thing on his mind, and that's enough to satisfy him, meaning one love. Then Volio is playing the polar opposite, sort of like an alter ego or a devil's advocate. And he urges fighting with fire, and he urges comparison of beauty with beauty. The fighting fire with fire is like Mars and Aries, and the comparing of beauty like beauty is like Venus in Libra. In line 99, where he sees the eyes as crystals, it's absolutely beautiful. However, all of this is still judgment by the eye. And Romeo is looking for more than judgment by the eye. In all things, especially in early Buddhism, there was a distinguishing of the doctrine or the beauty of the eye versus the beauty of the heart. Meaning to say that the eye can be fooled by things that are pleasant and that are beautiful, but one can't fool the heart. Whence comes that line in the West from the Little Prince? It is only with the heart that one can see true. What is essential is invisible to the eye. All right, Gracie, you're up. Let's do the next scene.
Nurse, my daughter. Call her forth to me.
Suzanne, you're up. Page 18.
Now by my maiden head at 12 years old, I bade her come. What, ma'am? What, ladybird? God forbid. Where's this girl? What, Julia? How now? Who calls?
Your mother. Madam, I am here. What is your will?
This is the matter. Nurse, give me a while. We must talk some people. Nurse, come back again and remember me. Thou hear our phone call. Thou knowest my daughter is ever speaking. Great, I can set her age unto an hour.
She's not 14.
I'll lay 14 of my teeth, and yet to my teen it be spoken, I have but 4. She's not 14. How long is it now to Lammas tide?
A fortnight and odd days.
Even odd of all days in the year, come Lammas Eve, at night shall she be 14. Susan and she, God rest all Christian souls, were of an age. Well, Susan is with God. She was good. She was too good for me. But as I said, on Lammas Eve at night shall she be 14. That shall she, Mary, I remember it well. Since the earthquake, now 11 years, and she was mean, I never shall forget it. Of all the days of the year upon that day, for I had then made wormwood to my dove, sitting in the sun under the dove house wall. My Lord and you were then at Mantua. Nay, I do hear of rain, but as I said, when it did taste the wormwood on the nipple of my dove, and felt it bitter, pretty fool, to see it catchy, and fall out with the dove. Shake, quoth the dove house. 'Twas no need, I trow, to bid me trudge, and since that time it is 11 years, and then she could stand high alone, nay by the rood. She could have run and waddled all about, for even the day before she broke her brow, and then my husband, God be with his soul, was a merry man, took up the child. Yea, quoth he, dost thou fall upon thy face? Thou wilt fall backward when thou hast more wit. Wilt thou not, Julie? And by my Hollydan, the pretty wretch left crying and said, to see now how a just shall come about. I warrant and I shall live 1,000 years. I never should forget. Wilt thou not, Julie? Quoth he, and pretty fool, yet stinted, and said,
Enough of this. I pray thee hold thy peace.
Yes, madam, yet I cannot choose but laugh, to think it should leave crying and say, and yet I warrant it had upon its brow a bump as big as a young cockerel stone, a perilous knock, and it cried bitterly. Yea, quoth my husband, fallest upon thy face? Thou wilt fall backward when thou comest to age. Wilt thou not, Jules? It stinted and said,
Since thou too, I pray thee, nurse, say on. These I have done. God mark thee to his grace. Thou wast the prettiest babe that e'er I nursed, and I might live to see thee married once. I have my wish.
We're at about line 63, Lady Capulet.
Mary. That Mary is the very theme I came to talk of. Tell me, daughter Juliet, how stands your disposition to be married? In honor that I dream not of.
In honor? Were not I thine only nurse, I would say thou hadst expect wisdom from thy feet. Well, think of marriage now. Younger than you, Karen Merlin, and ladies of esteem, are made already mothers. By my count, I was your mother much upon these years, that you are now a maid. Thus then in brief, the valiant Paris seeks you for his love.
A man, young lady, such a man as all the world, is a man of what?
Verona's summer hath not such a flower.
Nay, he's a flower, big, a very flower.
What say you? Can you love the gentleman? This night you shall behold him at our feast. Read o'er the volume of young fair's face, and find delight writ there with beauty's pen. Examine every merry lineament, and see how one another lends content. And what obscurity in this fair volume lies, find written in the margins of his eyes. This precious book of love, this unbound lover, to beautify him only lacks a cover. The fish lives in the sea, and 'tis much pride, for fair without the fair within to hide. That book in many's eyes doth share the glory, that in gold class flocks in the golden story. So shall you share all that he doth possess, to have him making yourself no less.
No less, nay bigger. You are white men.
Speak briefly. Can you like a Paris love?
How much to like you, and no more deep light dark my eyes, and love your sense, your strength, in the fly. And the guests are come, supper served up. We call my young lady asked for dinners, first in the pantry, everything spread. Wait, I beseech you, follow straight.
We follow thee. Juliet, the Countess stays. Oh, girl, happy night, happy day.
Even Shakespeare uses Gold Girl. Well, the nurse is a delightful character. Must be a wonderful role to play. In her very first lines, she uses swear words or curse words that are most interesting. I want to talk a little bit about that. There is a passage in St. Matthew's Gospel where Christ Jesus gives powers to Peter, telling him that whatever he binds in heaven will be bound in heaven, and what he binds in earth will be bound in earth. And this is done by word. If we look in the Old Testament, very briefly, it tells us that Adam and Eve, in those Lemurian times, named the animals, and that by their words of power, being still creatively whole, their words had enough power to bring the forms that the animals eventually inhabited. If we look at our own times, in males, at the beginning of the second climacterics, at around age 14, the male voice changes. At the same time that we come to sexual potency. So the whole idea is that the larynx is and was and will again be an organ of creative power. At one time it was powerful enough to change forms, and at another day it will be powerful again. If we look at the framing of the period of time of our current ignorance, as it was symbolized in the characters of The Tempest, Caliban represented the end of Lemuria when people were going into darkness, and he tried to do everything by cursing. Prospero represents the consciousness when we again become creative beings, and he accomplished his magic by words of power. In between the fall and the redemption, the voice and language have various functions. Because we are separated from communion with the Spirit in the spiritual worlds, we have become darkened. We live in a material darkness. Through sinning and suffering from our sins and being slaves to our desires and our ingrained habits, and having suffered the penalty of all of the above, we are cowed by our pains and the sufferings we've gone through. This has made us somewhat insecure, especially no longer aware of our divinity. We are insecure. So in our insecurity, the more insecure we are, we try to make up for it by being emphatic and dramatic. And part of what we do in that is swearing or cursing. Thus, if you look at a history of curse words, you will see a history of things that used to be considered sacred, or that used to be considered important or powerful, words that are used in cursing for their shock value. A teenager knows very well what words will shock his or her parent, and how to do it in just such a way to hurt. In Shakespeare's time, England was still very much Catholic. Therefore, we find throughout all of the plays, including this one, using Mary as a swear word. It was short for by Mary, and at that time, it was a shocking thing to hear the Mother of God, as Catholics referred to Mary, used in such a way. So it had that power. Nowadays, people are pretty secular, and we don't use religious words for swearing anymore. Instead, we're still coming out of that insecurity about sexuality and the potency of sexuality, and so we use sexual curse words. So both religious and sexual things are highly charged matters. But after a while, and many repetitions, swear words lose their shock value, and they lose their social or their psychological power. People lose respect for them. They become very watered down, or they become hackneyed and effete. Eventually they become trivial, and sometimes they become inverted. They become something funny. They become a parody or a burlesque of themselves in what they used to be. So we find the nurse who is almost a bawd swearing by her maidenhead of all things. And it's quite an interesting thing, because she's anything but a virgin. And and so one with sacred respect for the creative function would be shocked by it, but not so much anymore. Thus, when things become inverted and they become a laughing matter and they are used as a parody, it produces a relaxation. And that kind of relaxation, when we laugh, relieves our tension. When we can laugh at ourselves, we can see ourselves with a higher perspective. We can look at our folly. We can look at our crazy seriousness and all of that with the perspective of the higher self. And once we start looking with that perspective, that's the beginning of redemption. When we're looking with that godlike view, we're moving out of our all too personally attached egoism. Now, this isn't meant as a condonement or an encouragement of profanity, but it is certainly meant as an endorsement of relaxation and that kind of higher kind of view of things. And since we're looking at things sacred and profane, let's look at the sacred and profane in something else. Chronology or chronography. Now this scene shows the sacred and the profane in chronology. That is, when something happens. In our temporal secular world today, we use a very strict calendar. We refer to things on given days, of given weeks, of given months, of given years, and given centuries. So we say that there was an event on September 11th, 2001. But in reality, in our spiritual being, we do not relate to life in that way. That's too artificial to us. The calendar is almost like a roadmap where the boundaries of something are invisible lines. They're completely artificial. Yes, we can measure them with a theodolite or something like that, but they're artificial. We tend to date things in different ways. Throughout history, like especially in the ancient times, almost all of the ancient calendars were based on events in the lives of the gods. In the ancient Egyptian calendar, for example, in the cycle of Sophis, which lasted 1,460 years, every day was an episode out of the lives of the gods. Thus, the mundane life, the things that we do every day, was related to a divine drama that took place in a mythical inner spiritual heaven. This used to be the case in Christianity also. Nowadays we only look at, mostly at Christmas and Easter. Very few people look at St. John's Mass or Pentecost or anything like that. In the Christian calendar, there used to be many holy days. And beside that, every day had one or more saints sacred to it, or it was sacred to the saints. Thus, even in Christianity, for a long time, before we became so secular and so artificial that we're like our calendars or like our maps, life was attuned to things sacred. Lammas, August 1st, was Lamb Mass. It celebrated the Feast of St. Peter, when St. Peter was led off in chains, and the lambs were brought to the cathedrals for blessing on Lammas. It was a strange thing. It was mixed with all kinds of other things. On Lammas, menstrual blood, which was always an agency for magical practices, was sprinkled on the floors, and it was sprinkled on the animals, and it was done so to ward off evil spirits, which is kind of ironic because menstrual blood is often in the formulae of all kinds of black magical things. Lammas was also the day for the rent. It was your last day to pay your annual rent if you were a tenant farmer, sometimes even for city apartments. It was then considered the last day of reckoning, and it came to have the meaning of the last judgment, and eventually of putting things off to the last minute. So eventually the word Lammas came to mean never in a million years. So we're talking about something that has to do with the end of something. But it was also a beginning. Because on Lammas, the first bread made with the first grain of the new harvest was consecrated. And so it was like a first fruits time. So it was a day, like all holidays, a turning point. And it was the beginning of one thing and the end of something else. I don't know why Shakespeare chooses to bring this in, but he probably has some meaning, and maybe we'll figure it out along the way. The profane chronology, or the profane timing, is to relate events to nature. Since nature is the face of God, things that happen in nature are every bit as important as things that happen in mythology or in the lives of the gods. In this case, the reckoning time was the great earthquake of 1550, the great earthquake of 1550, and the other events were a trip to Mantua and a weaning. Now, if you think about it, you'll hear it in conversations a lot. We still do this. We don't do everything by the numbers of the years. We talk about the year that there was the big blizzard, or the year that there was the flood, or the year of hot summers. So there is, even in this profane way of measuring time, there's a validity. And it relates our lives to something real, and not to just an artificial calendar. That's a very important thing. Now, there are some things that are important about this, that something that's fascinating. This is the only instance that I know of in all of Shakespeare that we can figure out whether Shakespeare actually was using astrology for developing characters when he created characters. We know that he uses a lot of astrological terms, and we've seen that there are a lot of astrological parallels and pictures in the heaven that we find right in settings of the play, but now we can see whether there is an actual use of astrology. If Juliet is a Lammas child, she is a Leo. And that means we will watch now and to see whether the character of Juliet is the character of a Leo. And this is where we get Jerry to work for us here. If we want to get really carried away with this, I don't think it's going to work, but I don't know. Jerry has astrologue, and he can cast the horoscope for any person at any time in history. And from this, we know that she was born 3 years, because she's 14 now, years old, going to be 14 years old at this Lammas. And she was weaned at 3 years old when the earthquake was, and that means she was born in 1547. And she was born somewhere between sunset and midnight. So if Jerry does us a horoscope of 9:30 p.m. for August 1st, 1547, we'll see if that really is a star-crossed horoscope. We'll put it to the test. I don't think anything's going to come out of it, but it'll be interesting to see. There's another interesting thing in here that is different from the modern world, though La Leche League would really like it, and that is, it looks like in England, in Elizabethan England, that they weaned children at about age 3, which is a much later date than we wean children now. So that's an interesting little sidelight. And there's one other little sidelight in there, because this is something that Freud loved to talk about a lot. It was one of his favorite quotes. We find it on line 41 here and in line 46. The way Freud used to make the quote was, he said, "When a maid falls, she lands on her back." Weaned, it means when no longer suckling at the tit. All right, let's read scene 4, and Gracie's up to bat. No, I think Charlotte was the last one ready. No, is it really? Oh, okay. Oh, that was the first time. All right. You just wanted to be Romeo, I know.
Hey. What, shall the speech be spoke for our use, or shall it go without a home? The date is out of such prolixity. We've had no Cupid put wings with a scarf, bearing a Tartar's painted bow of black, scaring the ladies like a crow-keeper. No, without book, prologue, faintly spoke, after the prompter, for our entrance. But let them measure us by what they will. We'll measure them a measure and be gone.
Give me a torch. I am not for this ambling. Being but heavy, I will bear the weight.
Oh, that's a cute line, isn't it? Nay, gentle Romeo, we must have you dance.
Not I, believe me. You have dancing shoes with winded soles. I have a soul of lead, so stakes me to the ground, I cannot move.
You are a lover. Borrow Cupid's wings and soar with him above a common
I am pierced with this shaft, to soar with this light feathers, and so I cannot bound a fist above dull woe. Under love's heavy burden do I sink.
And to sink in it, should you burden love, too great oppression for a tender love. Is love a tender thing? It is too rough, too rude, too boisterous, and quick like storm.
Love be rough with you, be rough with love. Yeah. Correct love is working, and you beat love's out. Give me a case for my busy. A visor for a visor. What care I? What curious eye that holds deformity? Here are the beetle brows. Shall blush for me.
Come, knocking at her, no sooner in, but every man betake him to his legs.
Torch for me, that wanton's light of heart tickle the senseless rushes with their heels. I am provident with a grandsire phrase, be a candle holder and boucan. Aim was ne'er so fair as I am done.
Hut, studies them out, and constable's own words. If thou art done, we'll draw thee a slip from the mire of this the reverend law, wherein thou stickest us to the ear. Come, we burn thee in thy hope. Nay, that's not so.
And you, sir, in delay, we waste our lights in vain, like lights by day. Take our good meaning, for our judgment sits 5 times in that, ere once in our 5 wits.
And we mean well in going to this mask, but 'tis no wit to go.
Why may one ask?
I dreamt a dream tonight.
And so did I.
Well, what was yours?
The dreamers often lie. They're asleep while they do dream things true.
Oh, then I see Queen Maiden hath been with you. She is the fairy's midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone on the forefinger of an alderman, drawn with a team of little atomies athwart men's noses as they lie asleep. Her wagon spokes made of long spinner's legs, the cover of the wings of grasshoppers, her traces of the smallest spider's web, her collars of moonshine's watery beams, her whip of cricket's bone, the lash of filth, her wagoner a small gray-coated gnat, not half so big as a round little worm pricked from a lazy finger of a maid. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut, made by the joiner's squirrel or old grub, time out of mind the fairy's coachmakers. And in this state she galloped night by night through lovers' brains, and then they dream of love. Or courtiers' knees that dream on curtsies straight, or liars'
fingers whose straight dream on keys, or lady's lips whose straight on kisses dream, which oft the angry map with blisters plagues, because their breasts with sweetmeats painted are. Sometimes she gallops o'er a courtier's nose, and then dreams he of smelling out a suit. And sometime comes she with a tithe pig's tail, tickling a parson's nose as he lies asleep. Then dreams he of another benefice. Sometime she driveth o'er a soldier's neck, and then dreams he of cutting foreign throats, of breaches, ambuscados, Spanish blades, of health spies, fathom deep, and then anon drums in his ears, at which he starts and waits. And being thus frighted, swears a prayer or two and sleeps again. This is that very man that plights the manes of horses in the night, and bakes the elf locks in foul sluggish hairs, which once entangled much misfortune bodes. This is the hag, when maids lie on their backs, that presses them and learns them first to bear, making them women of good carriage. This is she.
Mark, yeah.
Peace, Mercutio, peace. Thou talkest of nothing.
True, I talk of dreams, which are the children of an idle brain, begot of nothing but that vain fancy, which is the sin of substances, the air, most inconstant of the wind. For who would even now approach the bosom of the north, and being angry, tossed away from that truth besides the new drop himself?
This wind you talk of blows us from ourselves. Supper is done, and we shall come too late.
I fear too early, for my mind misgives some consequence, and hanging in the stars shall bitterly begin this fearful date. With this night's revels, and expire the term of a despised life, flows it in my breast. By some vile forfeit of untimely death, but he that hath the steerage of my course, direct my sail. On, lusty gentlemen.
Strike drum. I have very little to say about this scene. It's so beautiful that, in this scene there's very little development in the character of Romeo since his first appearance. In the first scene, he's still lovesick and depressed. Paul, who is not here this evening, probably wouldn't agree, but this is probably an indication that he needs to go deeper in his love. Depression means to push down, to deepen. This seems to be the case because he's so concerned about unrequited love and his pains in it. He pleads about the singularity of his love, but he doesn't seem to be preoccupied with the object of his love. And he's all too concerned with himself. So this is maybe not a really deep love. It's about self and not the other. And love is about the other. And so this probably isn't a real deep love. And what? Yes, yes. And then that leaves Mercutio. A truly delightful guy. Benvolio himself speaks quite poetically, but he's like a candle next to the sun when he's with Mercutio. Mercutio strikes me as being something like the second trine between Mercury and the moon. That is, he is a delineator from images. He draws from images and he verbalizes. In second trines, Mercury, the verbalizer, receives or draws from the moon, which is the imager. All second trines are noted because the things that have been hidden behind the obvious are now disclosed. Mercutio can't stand a mask. He has to expose and he has to speak everything out. So he seems like one of these people that is perfectly poised between the right and left cerebral hemispheres. He can delineate from images and not be drawn out from either of them to one-sidedness. Hamlet, when we looked at Hamlet, was a mercutial kind of individual also. But Hamlet only spoke out of necessity, and he was stingy with his speech, except in his monologues, in his soliloquies. He liked to hold things in. Some psychological schools maintain, and do so correctly, that depression is suppressed anger. And that is one of the causes of depression. Now you can see that certainly with Hamlet. Mercutio can't suppress, or he can't hold anything back. He can't mask as Hamlet did. Hamlet had a lot of Saturn in him, and he was very much of a holder back. He was very much of a masking type of individual. Consequently, Mercutio is light and bright and sprightly and has nothing at all like depression. In fact, if you look around at people, very rarely do you find somebody that is a motor mouth that talks and talks and talks and lets it all out. Very rarely do you find a person like that ever being a depressive. But what a beautiful mania. She doesn't. So he's always sprightly and effervescent. Now, his theory of dreams is very mercurial, and it's also very modern. He is certainly not a depth psychologist about dreams. In the academic institutions, many scientists, most scientists, and even quite a few psychologists suggest that dreams are merely responses to external stimuli. And many people who follow this line of thought claim that there is no psychic connection between the stuff of the dream and the images that shows anything of a deeper psychological character. Some are a little bit more temperate and claim that there is psychological organization and that even imagination enters in, but that there's nothing highly significant. Depth psychologists, on the other hand, such as Freud and Jung, maintain that almost all of dream material is psychological. Mystics, such as Rosicrucians, have a line that is somewhere in between them. Each dream is unique. Or better said, each dream state is unique. Sometimes it's pretty obvious that the dreamer is attached to the physical body and that a good deal of the dream is a response to external stimuli, exactly as Mercutio and the modern material scientists claim. However, sometimes there is a good deal of undigested psychological matter from recent experience, and it gets attached to external stimuli or to the conditions of sleep. Very often, as we saw with Lady Macbeth, a somnambulist, people try to act out things from recent history and try to change them or try to complete them when they weren't able to complete them to their liking earlier. Sometimes, however, the Freudians and the Jungians are true. They're correct. That sometimes in the dream state, things push up from deep within our unconscious nature, things that need tending to or things that need to be expressed, they come up and enter into our dreams. So there are many kinds of dreams, and to maintain one view for all of them, as Mercutio tries to do, especially such a shallow view, poetic, beautiful, but shallow, is a mistake. Sometimes dreams are a road into the soul, but it's usually a secondary road and not the royal road that the depth psychologists used to think that it was. All right, we're all set to go with the last scene.
Where's Puffhan that he helps not to take away? He shook a trencher. He scraped the trencher.
One good manner shall lie all in one or two men's hands, and they in wash too. 'Tis a foul thing.
Away with the joint stools, remove the court cupboard, look at the plate. Good thou, save me a piece of marchpane. And as thou lovest me, let the porter and the Susan Grindstone and Nell, Anthony and Popton.
Aye, boy. Ready.
You are looked for and called for, asked for and sought for in reaching. Fancy here and there too. Cheery boys, keepers laugh, and the longer livers take off.
Welcome, gentlemen. Ladies that have their toes unplayed with corns will have a bout with you. Aha, my mistresses, which of you all shall now deny to dance? She that makes dainty, she'll, I'll swear, have corns. Am I come near you now? Welcome, gentlemen. I have seen the day that I have worn a visor and could tell a whispering tale in a fair lady's ear, such as would please. 'Tis gone, 'tis gone. You are welcome, gentlemen. Come, musicians, play. A hall, give room. Put it, girls. More light, you knaves, and turn the tables up, and quench the fire. The room is grown too hot. Ah, sirrah, this unlooked for sport comes well. Nay, sit, good cousin Capulet, for you and I are past our dancing days. How long is it now since last yourself and I were in a mass?
Our Lady, 30 years.
What man do not so much? Do not so much. Distance without show. Lucentio. Come to cut. Quickly as it will. Some 25 years, and then in it.
This more. His son is eldest, sir. His son is 30.
So you told me that? His son was but a ward 2 years ago. He was but a ward 2 years ago.
What lady's that which doth enrich the hand of yonder knight?
I know not, sir.
Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night, with rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear. Beauty's too rich for use, for earth too dear. So show the snowy dove trooping with crows, as yonder lady o'er her fellow shows, the measure's done. I'll watch her place of stand, and touching hers, make blessed my rude hand. Did my heart love till now? Forswear sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night.
This
by his voice should be a Montague. Fetch me a rapier, boy. What dares the slave come hither, covered with an antic face, to fleer and scorn at our solemnity? Now by the salt and honor of my kin, to strike him dead, I hold it is not a sin.
Why, how now, kinsman? Wherefore storm you so?
Uncle, this is a Montague out of fault, a villain that is hither come in spite, to scorn at our solemnity this night. And Romeo is it?
'Tis he, that villain Romeo.
Content ye, gentle cousin, let him alone. Bears him like a courtly gentleman, to say truth, for all that brags of him to be a virtuous and well-governed youth. It is not for the wealth of all this town, here in my house, do him disparagement. And for the patience, take no note of it. It is my will, the which if thou respect, show fair presence and put off these frowns, or beseeming semblance for a feast.
It fits when such a villain as he gets. I'll not endure it.
He shall be endured. What, good man, boy? I say he shall. Go to. Am I the master here, or you? Go to. You will not endure him. God shall mend my soul. You will make a mutiny among my guests. You will set cock and hoop. You be the man.
Why, uncle? 'Tis a shame.
Go to, go to. You are a saucy boy. Is it so indeed? This trick may chance to scathe you. I know what. You must contrary me. Marry, 'tis time. Well said, my hearts. You are a princox. Go. Be quiet, or more light, more light. For shame. I'll make you quiet. Wait, what? Surely, my hearts.
Patience perforce, the local holder meeting makes my flesh tremble, in their different greeting. I will withdraw, but this intrusion shall not seeming sweet convert to this rest gall.
If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this: my lips to blushing pilgrims ready stand, to smooth their rough touch with a tender kiss.
But, pilgrim, you do wrong your hands too much. Which manly devotion shows in this? For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Have not saints lips, and holy palmers too?
I told them this. They must be friends.
Well then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, friend thou, let's take from good sake.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not, although prayer's effect I take. With my lips, I find my sin is third.
And have my lips to sin take.
Sin from my lips? O trespass, sweetly urged, give me my sin again.
You kissed by the book.
Madam, your mother craves a word with you.
What is her mother?
Mary Gaspar, her mother is the lady of the house, and a good lady, and a wise and virtuous. I nursed her daughter that you talked withal. I tell you, he that can lay hold of her shall have the chinks.
Is she a Capulet? Oh, dear account, my life is my fourth death.
Away, begone, sportive at the best.
I still like here, the more is my own home. Nay, gentlemen, prepare not to be gone. We have trifling foolish banquet courts. Is it even so? Why then I thank you all. I thank you, honest gentlemen. Good night. Only horses here. Come on then, let's do this. By my faith, and wax is light. I'll to my rest.
Come hither, nurse. What is young gentleman?
Son and heir of old Tiberio.
What's he that now is gone out of doors?
Mary, that I think the young Petruchio.
What's he that follows here and would not dance?
I know not.
Go ask his name. He is married. My grave is like to be my wedding bed.
Montague, the only son of your great enemy.
Charge up.
My only love sprung from my only hate. Too early seen unknown and known too late. Prodigious birth of love it is to me, that I must love a loathsome enemy.
What's this? What's this? A rhyme I learned even now, of one I dance with all. Juliet?
Complex way to strangers, not complex way. Strangers are all gone. All are gone.
Titillating scene to end the act. You can't help but to like old Capulet. Seems in every scene that he's in, another beautiful side of his character comes out. Besides being wise from maturity and experience, he knows how to have fun, and he knows how to urge others to do so. He's not a stuffed shirt. And he's very willing to forgive his enemies and even welcome them in his house. This is a really beautiful man. Line 37 quickly shows another example of dating by the sacred year. This time it is, things are measured according to Pentecost. By line 43, Romeo has fallen in love again. Shakespeare mocks him, and he has sport with him. Because in line 50, in that very poetic statement of his love, he sees her as a snowy dove among the crows. This is a reference back to scene 2, line 90, where Benvolio tries to convince him that if he goes to the ball, he will see another that will be as a swan among crows. And so, in a way, Shakespeare is sort of making fun of him, sort of like the cock crew thrice. Now, it doesn't appear to be that Shakespeare is trying to say in this sudden conversion of Romeo from the love of Rosaline to the love of Juliet that somebody can love anyone. Maybe eventually that will happen, but that will happen with altruistic love. We will love each and every and anyone. And it doesn't appear to be that he's saying something as profane as long as somebody is beautiful, everybody can fall in love with that person. That does happen. It happens to men who are very much subject to the doctrine of the eye that we talked about before. Men are objectifiers, and they see a pretty face or a pretty body, and they think they're in love. All he seems to be really saying is that love or fantasies of love can make fools of us. That's literally what the word infatuation means. Fatuous means to be a fool, and infatuation means to be made into a fool or fatuous. Romeo, when he's describing what's happening inside of him as he looks upon Juliet, between lines 46 and 55, he makes a lot of allusions to light and to pure whiteness. Now, it is true that in Elizabethan England, the people did have an aesthetic or a prejudice toward white-skinned or pale-skinned women. The poets, it was almost an idiom to talk about the milk-white skin of a girl or of a young woman. But what actually seems to be taking place is something much more than that. Various people have remarked that when one loves very much in their loving, they appear very beautiful. Or when one very much focuses on something else, they see the beauty in it. I recently just had a conversation with a brain surgeon. And he talked about brain surgeries that last hours and hours. And he said it's all right-brained because the eye-hand association in doing the surgery is so careful and you're so concentrated on it for so many hours. And he says when you get out of the operating room, you've been so right-brained and you've been so much in the world of looking, he says you can't even talk. He says you can't even tell anybody your name. And he says everybody looks beautiful. They're bathed in light. And it's something like that that Shakespeare is talking about. Whether it is someone looking with love or someone who is filled with love. Rudolf Steiner has remarked that when one has been awakened to divine love by some kind of enlightenment or initiation or something like that, even to a small degree, they're transformed. And one of the indications of that transformation is that they're interested in everything. They have awakened the attractive love, and they're attracted to this and this and this. There's nothing that doesn't attract their interest. Another thing that Steiner claims is that to the clairvoyant, such an one who has been enlightened or awakened to love, in that person the aura has more light in it. It's bright, and it is that light that corresponds to the love or interest. I think we've all seen people who are shrouded in light or bathed in light, basically because it is their nature to love. Often even pregnant women are bathed in that kind of light. Now it's not always clear where the light issues from, whether it is from the subject or the object or both. Clairvoyance in this regard requires a good deal of discrimination to tell where things are coming from. For example, many years ago I had a friend that was a clairvoyant. And before she learned the ethics of what to do with the clairvoyance, she wanted to be accepted by other people, and she won friendships with the guys where she was working by picking racehorses for them, winners for racehorses. And she did this by having them give her a racing form, and she would look at it, and she would pick out the winners because the names of the winners had more light around the print when she looked at them. Now, in this case, it seems very unlikely that the horse could project its light and show up in the print of the racing form. What is much more likely is the fact that though she was somewhat clairvoyant, she may not have been completely aware of spiritual reality. And she may have had an unconscious or a semi-conscious attunement to greater reality that included the future, and that she could recognize the truth of reality by attuning herself to the winner, and the light was probably coming from her. The source of light is not always clear. I remember one time about 32 or 33 years ago, two friends used to come to the bookstore here, and one would select books for the other one without even looking at the contents of the books. He'd say, you buy this book, it's got more light around it. I had another friend that claimed that when you read the writings of an initiate, you can always tell that it was written by an initiate, because the light along the lines as you read them was brighter. Again, it was as though the lines of print were covered or surrounded with light. This person even felt that you could tell what mystery school the person was that wrote the material in the first place because of the hue, the faint hue of the light that surrounded the print. You understand what we're trying to get at here. We're questioning the old maxim, is beauty in the eye of the beholder, or is it in the object of love? Or is it in both? What is actually happening with Romeo? Is he seeing Juliet as beautiful because she's surrounded by light? Is it because he has a lot of light coming from himself? Or is it because of the transaction between the two of them? Oh yeah, Chunker. The boxcar kitty. I call him Chunkarachara because Chunkarachara was one of the incarnations of the Buddha, and he has a sort of Buddha-esque kind of body. In any case, Romeo is indeed transformed, and he's transformed despite all of his earlier protests. Line 56 is interesting in a similar way. It turns out that Tybalt can tell somebody from another family by their voice. Now that's pretty remarkable. Now the Hutus could tell who the Tutsis were because the Tutsis were tall and skinny, and because they used a different language or spoke with a different accent or they wore different colors. But to be able to tell someone of another family by the quality of their voice is quite something. In a way, it shows that even hatred, as much as love, can be very discriminating about and discerning about what it sees. Obviously, in all of this, what we're trying to get at is the psychic connection, the relationship of subject to object. And what we're saying at this point is that if we let go of self-doubts, if we have some interest to take us beyond our self-limitations and our self-doubts, we have gone a long way toward clairvoyance. Beyond that, we have loving feelings that can carry us a lot further. Tybalt is the opposite of Romeo in more ways than just being his enemy. Romeo represents love and growth, and Tybalt is furious. He focuses on enemies. He's quick to eliminate people. But again, old Capulet comes through, and he really has liberal wisdom. What to say about the love dialogue between Romeo and Juliet? It isn't just clever wordplay. It seems to be the kind of conversation when both parties are desiring to communicate something, but because of social forms, or because of having to be proper, or because of being shy, it's very hard to do it. But because both people really want it, they get it, and they do it by the subtlest of suggestions, and each takes the suggestion of the other and pulls it along. by the time they've kissed, each has had only 5 speeches. And there are less than 15 sentences that have passed between the two of them. From the time they were complete strangers, having never seen each other before, to the time of their first kiss, there is that little bit of an interaction. This is where we miss something doing it like this, because obviously the greater part of the interaction, the little vignette between Romeo and Juliet, has to be visual. They have to see each other, and the way they see each other, there is instant love. They just feel each other right away. The metaphor of a supplicant pilgrim, I can understand that because it shows a kind of humbling. And every time we experience something greater than ourselves, we are humbled. And that makes it an effective metaphor. I suspect that there is something more to the use of these words, but I don't know what it is. My only guess is that it may be that Romeo is wearing a costume and mask that suggests something like a pilgrim. And that's the reason that he takes that line. That leaves us with one thing to discuss, or to begin discussing, and that is the character of Romeo. The first question we want to ask about Romeo is he a logical or a psychological character? He begins the act in love with Rosalind, who is inaccessible to him socially because she is Capulet's niece, and because she is a virgin with the temperament of a Diana or of an Artemis. He ends the act completely in love with Juliet, who is also inaccessible to him. And that only after a very few sentences and 2 kisses. All through the act, he's baffled by the paradoxes of love. He's depressed by his unfulfilled state, and he ends up the scene in despair at his new dilemma. Question is this a real character, or is this somebody who's been assembled for the sake of a drama? Can a character like this actually exist? There are indeed romantics that fall in love numerous times in life, at the drop of a hat or a handkerchief, but they are usually quite shallow and very immature, and they're almost laughable in their sickly romanticism. That doesn't seem to be Romeo. He seems to be a little bit deeper than that. And he has a very humane side to him, which usually comes from a riper or a more old soul. He doesn't seem to be as deep or as thoughtful as Hamlet, but he does question things to the depth that he reaches paradox. He's certainly a more feelingful and romantic person than Hamlet, and it's not just because he's speaking in verse. So he's not shallow and he's not trivial. We look at our other example of falling in love. When Antony falls in love with Cleopatra at first sight, it is because she is devastatingly attractive and she's well schooled in the ways of love, in the ways of beauty, in the ways of enticement. Moreover, she is the Venus that is a complement to his exaggerated martial nature. He's a soldier's soldier. He's a field commander who lives right among his men, and they respect him because of his courage and his bravery. Cleopatra is what is dormant inside of him, what he needs to be whole. It's more than lust, but lust is quite a bit of it. So there is a psychological reason why Antony and Cleopatra fall in love. But Romeo is different. He falls in love with somebody socially inaccessible. And he falls in love with somebody who is psychologically inaccessible. Somebody that is as unattainable as the Virgin Mary. To him, Rosalind might indicate some kind of feminine ideal. A lunar Diana who parades through the starry heaven as queen of it all, but distant, bright, and unattainable. Artemis or Diana always was the patroness of virgins. So probably she represents some kind of divine or queenly feminine which is absent or dormant in him. When Juliet comes along, she's more real. She's more live. And she's less of a symbol, and she is more the embodiment of his need or of his complement than just being an ideal. If this is the case, if he is trying to find the feminine and seeking it in Juliet, who we do not know the psychology of yet, we know even very little of the psychology of Romeo. But as far as it goes, it makes it look like his actions are not shallow and that he is not an illogical character. If we look speculatively into the functioning of Romeo, it is not to diminish the love that he has. Love, when it issues from deep within our being, does work through psychological channels. But that doesn't mean, or that doesn't take anything away from the love. It's very much like a river that flows through a valley between mountains. It follows that channel because that's the channel that there is. And that doesn't take anything away